Musings of a Modern Conservative, Short Essays on Various Political Topics, by Thomas Hamilton. Section 1. Musings Involving Political Association. Essay 5. On Fakers. It should come as no surprise that not all individuals in the world actually conform to one of the two various political associations. I view these individuals as irrational fakers. The question at hand seems less about the apparent existence of such individuals and rather what constitutes a faker, and how many of them actually exist. More important, though, how do fakers come about? Can a faker be recognized? And if they can, are they necessarily bad individuals? Couldn't an otherwise harmless individual simply be neither conservative nor liberal? Isn't the use, in this case, of the term faker simply referring to those that in all other circumstances simply decide to be held down by neither worldview? In other words, isn't the use of the term faker really simply a euphemism for an individual who has no ideological restraint? This may be the case, but what kind of value would such an individual have to a society? Wouldn't this individual by any other name be simply an opportunist? Isn't the idea that one has no philosophical structure simply a way for an individual to do as they please without the otherwise normal and seemingly rational constraints associated with a philosophical view? Isn't the key of the concept of the faker a lack of rational restraint? Moreover, don't both the conservative and liberal utopias offer at least some room for many sub-concepts? What other concepts could there be besides a strong concept of moralistic equality or moralistic independence? Aren't other moral philosophical concepts simply a rationalization of these two utopian ideals? If they are simply a rationalization of these two utopian views, wouldn't then a faker be an individual who through various means twists these concepts and forms an otherwise irrational view? So then how does a faker come about? Wouldn't it seem obvious that a faker is an individual who in general has an otherwise irrational philosophical association? Wouldn't these individuals then go about seeking some form of individual pursuit without the normal restraint of a philosophical or moral grounding? The individual in question, for some reason or another, decides that the philosophical restraints of either the liberal or conservative have no rational association to themselves. Wouldn't this then push them to go about exacting their own new and irrational association on the rest of the world? The question is then, couldn't any political association in some manner be rational, or rationalized at least to the individual? Couldn't this then be like some new and grand philosophy? Isn't it wonderful to create and change the world? How would anyone know if the change is for the better if it is not tried? I would wager that these arguments, at least in some form or another, have been used by many fakers throughout time to cause one individual or group some significant harm. Though, isn't this in some measure the argument the faker uses to go about their own individual pursuit? More importantly then, wouldn't this be the argument for the liberal utopia? Aren't fakers chiefly, in this case, coming from the conservative utopia? What restraint could a conservative rationally place upon another individual if they wanted to pursue their own interests? This is how the conservative faker comes about, by arguing that whatever they do to pursue their own interests is otherwise moral. This is not a conservative. They are fakers. Isn't the primary need of a conservative to have values? How can one value one's labor without moral intentions, meaning not taking unduly from another? If an individual cannot act in a valued manner, they must by that means be valueless. If they are valueless, they are not a conservative. They, by that rationale, are either a liberal or a faker. In other words, if they are acting in their own immoral, valueless self-interest, they are a faker. The prime example of such individuals are often and unfortunately found amongst the ranks of business people. It is not to say that all or even most act in such a manner, but isn't this argument given by business people most of all, though? Are all conservatives fakers? Or is it the case that there are conservative fakers who are valueless individuals that use the cloak of moral individualism for valueless self-gain? Wouldn't part of conservatism then also need some form of moderation? In other words, a kind of evening out, or equality? Couldn't then, by that measure, some form of argument be made for the liberal utopia? So in order to be a pure conservative, by default, one must engage in immoralities, and if they seek some form of moral equality, they are then in some way enacting the liberal utopia as well? This is what I call the false idealism of the faker. The conservative utopia, as it were, stands primarily on the principle of independence, but is ultimately tempered by one's own self-labor, and not on the forced or coerced labor of another. Isn't this then the problem with the faker? That they coerce the labor out of another by a means other than reward. How can a conservative's labor be valued if he is taking the labor unduly from another? In essence, isn't the conservative faker truly an exact contradiction of the conservative, because they steal that which the conservative values most, namely labor? In the end, the conservative needs to form a set of morals that assist them in moderating their own greed. If a conservative truly has no morals, then they will by nature fall into a trap where they become a valueless, immoral faker. Then, isn't this the rationale for the liberal utopia? Couldn't the liberal utopia be explained by the conservative faker? Isn't it the case that the liberal simply tries to exact a kind of justice upon the conservative in order to curtail their greed? In this case, doesn't the liberal have a rather unique rationale for their utopia? Doesn't the liberal get to exact a kind of equality, using the morality of the conservative to help society form exactly what the conservative wants? After all, doesn't the liberal simply seek a moral equality in their utopia? Isn't this, in part, at least what the conservative wants, moral equality? The best answer to this is no. The conservative is not interested in equality. Morality and values are what the conservative longs for, not equality. The liberal then goes about and seeks the kind of forced equality that only they can provide. Why would anything else matter to the liberal, though? They only need equality and justice. If everything is just, and everything is equal, who cares about what individuals value or what morals come from those values? How then to go about bringing about equality? Couldn't it be said that any method that brings about equality valid? If the greed did not exist, would there need to be a kind of artificial equality? Equality would naturally occur without the help of a society. But if not for those that remove more than that which is theirs, more than that which they need, then, if those individuals who are not greedy do not of their own will give up all that which they do not need, it ought to be removed by force. And if not by force, then by what other means? Why should any individual or group suffer because of another's greed? How then to go about reobtaining that wealth? It would seem obvious, though, that it should be gotten back in the same manner in which it was taken, by any means. The liberal will then, by various means, go about removing wealth from only the richest and most well-off. Aren't these the only ones that are in need of having their wealth removed, though? Isn't it just the rich who have too much? In other words, aren't the poorest really the ones in need? Then why not form a society around such a cause? It would seem obvious as well that there are individuals that have a special station in life, and that if they don't make things equal, the few greedy will come back and make society unequal again. Shouldn't there be someone to prevent this? Shouldn't there be an individual to bring out such a form of equality? In other words, one who is just slightly higher than everyone else, so that there are not a large number of greedy that will harm the equality of society? This is the liberal faker, the individual who thinks that they can make society better by exacting their own brand of equality upon the rest of humanity. It is often the case that these people turn out to be dictators and tyrants of sorts. Isn't this what liberals want, though? A society that is equal? Couldn't it be said also that in such a society, even with a tyrant, that the majority of people are equal? How could a liberal say no to this? Why can't equality come by force? Shouldn't equality come by any means necessary? How can the liberal fight the conservative then, if not by his own or other harsher means? Isn't this society, at least, a step in the right direction? Couldn't it be said that once the tyrant is gone, then the liberal will have their utopia, an organized society that is equal? The easiest answer is no. The liberal knows that once inequalities are mixed into society, they will only become more and not less abundant. Couldn't it be said that by using the conservatives, and in some cases, neither the liberals nor the conservatives means to create equality, that it is devoid of justice? Doesn't the liberal need, in order to form their society, a strong sense of justice? Isn't a by any means mentality lacking the equality and the measure of justice? By that contention, couldn't it be argued that this would in some way completely remove the notion of equality, as in order for society to be equal, it must be just. Likewise, in order for it to be just, it must be equal. Then, The liberal faker is not a liberal at all, simply an individual who seeks their own means and ends, and not that of the betterment of the collective. To conclude briefly, I do not want the reader to begin the finger-pointing process, as I believe that the majority of individuals are not fakers, say 99% of the world. But I do think that the fakers are out there, and individuals should be on the lookout for their telltale signs. I would ask the reader not to fall into the easy and alluring traps of the faker.